That's it, guys. We are doing it. We're taking on the Mark Herman's infamous beast, which is Empire of the Sun. Today, we assume the role of US Marines, invading island after island in the Pacific in blood-stained operations until we finally clear out the Pacific Ocean and reach the heart of Japan itself to eventually bring down the mighty Japanese empire to its knees. This is Empire of the Sun. I know many will say that this is a very complicated game, and it honestly is. It is complicated at 3 levels. First, you have to learn a whole bunch of rules. Then you have to incorporate all these rules into viable strategies. And at the 3rd level, because this is a card-driven game, much like Twilight Struggle to name just one, this means you have to adapt to each given game, depending on what kind of cards you have drawn and what your opponent has drawn. However, trust me, if we can't help you learn the game through this tutorial, then nobody can. So, Empire of the Sun is a 2-player game. One player assumes the role of Japan, and the other player assumes the role of the Allies during the Pacific War. So this is our map, our vast and beautiful map. It's got a lot of features. There's jungle, there is mountain, there's a lot of stuff. But for now, I just want you to focus your attention into these 2 icons. This blue one stands for port, and this one is an airfield. Most ports are airfields as well, and some other hexes are just airfields without ports. Ports and airfields are arguably the most important features in the game, because you will have to keep moving your naval and air units a lot around the map. So let's have a look at our units. These are the Japanese units. The white ones are units of Japanese Navy, and the yellow ones are units of Japanese Army. These ones are headquarters. As you can see, they are HQ, which stands for headquarters. So we have 2 branches of the Japanese military: Army, which includes these infantry units represented by this icon, and air divisions. And we also have Japanese Navy units, which include these guys. They are ground units like the infantry armies or divisions. These ones are SNLF Marines. And there are also battleships like this one. These are naval units. Naval units also include the carriers like this one. And we've also got air units. This one is an air flotilla. Now let's have a look at the allied units. These ones, the blue and green ones, are American units. The red ones are British units. And all of these tan backgrounded ones are collectively called Commonwealth units. The term Commonwealth refers to the former British Empire, so Britain and its colonies. So these ones are British units proper, defined by their red color. This one is an Indian unit. These ones are Australian units. And there are also the Dutch units and Chinese units. These 2 are allied units as well, but they are not Commonwealth because they do not belong to the British Empire. They are Dutch and Chinese units. And let's not forget these guys. These ones are New Zealanders. They are also Commonwealth units. These ones are Allied headquarters. This one is an American headquarter. This is a Commonwealth headquarter. And this is a joint headquarter. Now let's get into further details. Ground units are either brigades, like this one, defined by the single X. This means it's of a small size, a brigade. These ones, with the 2 X's, are divisions. This one is an army corps, and this one is an army, defined by its quadruple X. Most units have a full strength size and the reduced size, which is at the back. So, for example, this is a Japanese army, and in particular, this is the 16th Japanese army, as you may read here. So this is a full-strength Japanese army with two stats. This one is the attack strength of 18, and this is the defense strength of 12. And if it gets hit, it is reduced by one step, and this is its reduced form with an attack strength of 9 and a defense strength of still 12. As already mentioned, this is the army ID. It is the 16th army. And as about these numbers, these ones indicate that this particular unit is set up at the beginning of the game in this particular hex, which is 3416 in this case, which if we look at the map would be here in Palau Island. Also, if we flip it to its full strength size, we will notice this one symbol at the top right corner, which means that the unit arrives in its reduced form. So this is the correct side, which indicates the hex of arrival. Other units do not have a setup hex, but instead they indicate their turn of arrival. For example, this one arrives in turn 5. Okay, so on with the rest of the units. This one is a simple naval unit, which is a surface ship, no range on it, just attack and defense. And this one is a carrier naval unit, which includes not only an attack strength and a defense strength, but also a range. This is a carrier, which of course means it is carrying airplanes, and these airplanes go on a patrol around the unit. So it has a range of 2, which means that if it stands here, if it is standing here in hex 4710, then its air forces can patrol all around and it can attack 2 hexes far. Of course, air units also have their own attack, defense, and range, and they may also have a range in parentheses, which we are going to talk about later, about its importance. And some units may also have a double range indicator. So this one has an attack strength of 12, defense strength of 10, a range of 2, and an extended range of 4. Don't worry, we shall talk about all that in detail. And let's conclude our unit presentation with the headquarters. The headquarters, of course, indicate their setup hex, which in this case is 5808 for this one, or their turn of arrival, which is this one, for example, turn 2 for the SIAC headquarters. So, as already mentioned, this is a Japanese headquarters. This one can command and activate units of Japanese Army and Japanese Navy. This one is an American headquarters. It can only command units of American Navy and American Army. It has no authority to the Commonwealth units. It can only activate these ones. This is a Commonwealth headquarters. It can activate all Commonwealth units, which of course means British, Indian, Australians, and New Zealanders. And it can also command Chinese units as well as American Air Force units. Let's not forget to mention that these ones, these air forces, have a particularly long range, which is 6. These ones are called long-range bombers, and they've got some particular rules, which we're gonna cover later. For now, just remember that this is regular air forces, and this is long-range bomber air units. Now, back to the headquarters. As mentioned, the Commonwealth headquarters may activate US air units, as well as all Commonwealth and Chinese units. However, they cannot command the Dutch units. As for the Joint Allied headquarters, they can command all Allied units, be it American, Commonwealth, Chinese, or even Dutch. So as you may understand, the Dutch units may only be commanded by the joint Allied headquarters. As for the stats indicated, this is the command range of the headquarters, so the distance in hexes up to which this headquarters can activate the units. And this one refers to its efficiency rating, which means how many units it can activate, which can be modified, but we shall explain all of this later. As for the sequence of the game itself, it is conducted in turns, starting from turn 1, which is December 1941, when the historical attack on Pearl Harbor happened, which started the whole war thing. And then it may last up to 12 turns, depending on the scenario. So it may extend up to May to August 1945 at the longest. Of course, there's many scenarios, some which is yearly, like playing the whole of 1942 or the whole of 1943 and then finishing the game. Or there are campaign scenarios which may extend from the beginning till the end. The turn itself is conducted in the following steps. First, we got the reinforcement segment, which means we get the units that are due to arrive as reinforcements at the current turn. For example, if we've got turn 3, this unit is about to arrive. We place these units mainly in ports or airfields according to the restriction we're gonna mention later. Then we've got the replacement segment, which means, for example, we may bring back some eliminated units from the dead or flip reduced units back to their full strength side. And of course, if a unit is reduced and then reduced again, it goes to the eliminated units pile. Then we've got the strategic warfare segment, which has to do with the Americans doing some submarine warfare or strategic bombing of Japan, and this actually affects the number of cards the Japanese player is going to draw. And then we've got the deal strategy cards segment. In this segment, each player draws 4 to 7 cards from their own respective decks. So each player has got their own decks. This is the Japanese deck, and this is the Allied deck from which to draw. There are several kinds of cards in the deck. The black ones are called military events, which are used mainly to activate units for an offensive. These ones are reaction cards, various kinds of reaction cards. And these ones are either political events or resource events. So each player's actual round is called offensive, which means when a player plays a card, he is the offensive player, and the non-active player is called the reaction player. So mainly the offensive player will activate units in order to conduct an offensive and possibly conduct battles, and the non-active player, as the reaction player, is the only one eligible to play the reaction cards. More on that later. But after dealing the strategy cards, we're entering the offensive phase. We've got the initiative determination, which means which player is going to go first. And then we've got the offensive segment, during which players alternate playing one card each or passing. That's also an option. Then we've got the political phase, after all players have exhausted their hands. At the end of the turn, actually, we have the national status segment, during which we check if certain nations have surrendered, for example, which might have particular consequences on the US political will. So let's have a look at this track. This is the US political will track, which means in certain cases, this political will might go down or up. For example, during the national status segment, we check if minor nations participating in the war have surrendered. I'll give you a simple example. This is Malaya, and if the Japanese player during the national status segment is controlling these two particular hexes, which is Singapore and Kuantan, then all of Malaya surrenders. And this results in the US political will going down by 1. So, depending on which nations surrender and a handful of other factors, the US political will may go up or down. And after concluding the national and US political will segment, upon which if US political will reaches 0, the Japanese player instantly wins the game, then we enter the attrition phase, during which units that are out of supply are either reduced or possibly eliminated from the map. Then we've got the end of turn phase, during which we advance the turn marker and do a bunch of other adjustments, and then we can play the next turn. So as I mentioned, one way to end the game is if the US political will reaches 0, and it's far too early to talk about the rest of the victory conditions. For now, I would like to further break down the offensives phase, or the offensives segment, which is the main part of the game, actually. So during a typical offensive, the offensives player, or the active player, uses an in-supply headquarters to activate in-supply units in order to move them and possibly conduct battles with them. For example, this Yamamoto guy, which is the combined fleet headquarters, can activate all these units that are within his range in order to possibly move them. For example, move this army, this Japanese army, from this hex to Manila, and activate this one, for example, to move by sea and do some sea invasion, and this one to use its range and attack this US carrier. The number of units he may activate depends on the card played, which might possibly be a military event or any other kind of card. However, there are two ways to play a card. You either play a military event, which is a black card, as an event card, or you can play any kind of card, including a military event black card, as an offensives card, or OC. So it is either EC, event card, or OC, offensives card. And each card has also got an offensives value, or OC value, on its top left corner. The OC value may be from 1 to 3. If you play a card as an OC, which can be any card, as mentioned, then you add its OC value to the HQ's efficiency rating, and this is the number of units that this HQ may activate. So for example, if you play a 1 OC card as an OC, then this HQ, the combined fleet, with its efficiency rating of 3, can activate up to 4 units, which is 3 for its efficiency rating, plus 1 for the card's OC value. If you're talking about military event black cards played as events, then these also carry a logistics value. The logistics value of the military event is in this case added to the headquarters efficiency rating, and this may result in much more units being activated. For example, if the logistic value is 4, this means that if combined fleet is the activating headquarters, it may activate up to 7 units, which is 4 for the card's logistic value, plus 3 for the headquarters efficiency rating. These units may move and possibly conduct battles. But if you are playing the card as an OC, then you may only declare battle in one hex. For example, activate this air flotilla, for example, plus possibly some naval unit, and conduct a battle here. You can conduct no more battles if you're playing the card as an OC. But if you're playing a black card, a military event, as an event, you may declare as many battle hexes as you wish. Now, as mentioned, the activating HQ must be in supply, and the units activated must also be in supply. And also, there has to be a line of activation to these units. So it's time to make a big pause and talk about the hardest part of the game, and actually what makes Empire of the Sun so really hard, which is supply and activation. Please bear with me because we will be going through a number of examples until you understand this rule completely. And if you do, then you are well on your way to mastering this game.